Welcome to our lecture on models and planning. You're going to need to watch the slideshow and complete an assignment before we come to our next class. What I always ask students before we start talking about planning your program for your grant is I ask you, when you're planning a vacation or a trip, what is the very first thing you decide? Most people decide where they're going. Where is the trip? And that's exactly what we do when we plan. Before you plan anything about your program, you need to know where you're going. At the end of 3 years for your grant, where should you be? So just like planning a trip, if we're writing a program or a curriculum or a training or a grant, the very first thing we address is where will we be at the end of the grant. So we're going to use two models. This is the Precede Proceed model by Larry Green. This is the original diagram, and here's the diagram in a way that's easier to read. If you look at Larry Green's model, we start at the far right, which is the end. We're going to start with the quality of life. In all of your grants, the quality of life has been dictated by the overarching goals of the grant. In our field, the federal government publishes a document called Healthy People and the Year. It's created for every decade. There are grant goals made for that decade. There are program goals made for that decade that approach the quality of life. We are now finishing Healthy People 2020, and we are beginning to enter Healthy People 2030. So they're in the final stages of writing Healthy People 2030. They're looking at all the data from the last decade, and they're creating new goals on where they would like us to be in quality of life by the year 2030. So that's the very first phase. That's called social assessment, and we're looking at quality of life. The next phase is called the epidemiological phase, and this is where we're looking at health data. I believe your book combines these two phases together. In the epidemiological phase, we are examining data like morbidity, which is death, which is illness, mortality, which is death, incidence, which is new cases, and prevalence, which is overall cases. So in the epidemiological review of the data, you're actually seeking out data that will tell you the percentage. So what percent of the population is addicted? What percent of the population becomes teen parents? What percent of the population dies in the first year of life? What percent of the population becomes ill from other diseases when they have diabetes? So those are all the kind of data that you're going to find for the epidemiological piece. The next piece is the behavior and environment piece, and that's related to what you find in the epidemiological data. The data you find is either going to be related to behavior and lifestyle, or it's going to be related to environment, and sometimes it's related to both. All of your grants, I believe, ask you to address environment as well as behavior and lifestyle. What's been discovered in the last 20 years is if we create programs that only address behavior and lifestyle of individuals, and we do not address the environment in which they live and work, then the behavior and lifestyles will not be permanent changes. As soon as you put someone back into the same environment in which they've been, behaviors and lifestyles tend to revert back to where they were. So in this area, what we're looking at is behavior and lifestyle. So if we're looking at infant mortality, what behaviors and what aspects of lifestyle make infant mortality higher? If we're looking at drug addiction, what behaviors and lifestyle make drug addiction more likely? If we're talking about breast cancer, what behaviors and lifestyles make that more likely? However, you also have to look at the environment. So when you look at infant mortality, what parts of the environment, what aspects of the environment contribute to high infant mortality? What parts of the environment contribute to high addiction rates? And what part of the environment contributes to breast cancer? So as we're going through all of this, we're going to be looking at data, and then you're going to have to be able to identify whether it's personal, behavior, lifestyle, or it's environmental. The next section is called the ecological and educational assessment. You should have learned this in Health 222, but just to go over, predisposing elements or constructs are those items that people come to you with. So people come to you poor, people come to you overweight, people come to you uneducated, people come to you apathetic, they come to you with specific genetic makeup. Whatever it is that's predisposed, that they already have, that is a predisposing factor. Reinforcing factors are those elements in the environment or their environment that promote the behavior. And it could be they promotes a negative behavior or what promotes a positive behavior. In the reinforcing area, we usually have things like media, including social media, friends, family, religion, organizations, all of those items that bombard an individual and contribute to their behavior. And the last one is enabling. And in the enabling piece, we're looking at behaviors, items that encourage behavior. There's two main items here. One is accessibility and one is availability. So availability means that something is there for people to use. Accessibility is that they can use it. So if I go back to breast cancer, which I will use most of the semester for examples, there could be a breast mammography place down the street from where I live, and that makes it available. However, if it's only open from 9 to 3 and it doesn't have any, it's not family friendly, and I have 3 children and I work from 9 to 5, then it's not really accessible to me. So it might be available, but that doesn't mean it's accessible. And for most of your grants, accessibility and availability tend to be big issues in the environment. The next stage is stage 5. And in that one, you're looking at policy and administrative things that have to happen, and then you're going to actually implement your program. So in the policy and regulation, there might be policies that actually are inhibiting positive behaviors or are promoting positive behaviors. And as we get further along in the semester, we can talk about those. Phase 6 is implementing your program. Phase 7 and 8 are process and impact evaluation. Process is evaluating the processes that are happening. So if I'm running a breast cancer reduction program and I'm running it at 2 different churches, one church has almost 100% participation rate and the other church has a 10% participation rate, there's a problem in process. In process evaluation, I would step back and say to myself, what is going on where this church does not have high participation? You wouldn't just keep going with poor participation, you would try to fix it, and that's what process does. Impact evaluation happens immediately after your program ends, or immediately after a course ends, or an intervention ends. So if I'm running a breast cancer reduction program and I have 6 classes, at the end of each class there might be an impact evaluation, or at the end of 3 months there might be an impact evaluation. Impact evaluations happen relatively close to the end of a program or intervention. Outcome evaluations are long-term, and they're the items that contribute to quality of life. So if your grant is 3 years long, it's not going to have outcome based on only itself, but it will produce outcome based on all of the other programs that are occurring across the country. So then if you notice, we start at the end and we end at the end. In reality, as you're going across from right to left on the top, you should also be thinking about left to right on the bottom. As you're thinking about the behavior and environment, you should be thinking about ways that you could impact those, change behaviors. And as you're talking about these predisposing, reinforcing, and enabling factors, you should be thinking about what processes you could put into place, what programming you could put into place that would change that. So as you get down here and you do your evaluation, the goal, of course, is to be successful. The other model we're going to discuss briefly is a health belief model. This is a more difficult model for most students to understand because you are looking at the perception of your population. So if you're dealing with teen moms, what are their perceptions of risk? For example, if teen pregnancy or sexually transmitted infections is the purpose of your program, you have to determine, do the teens in your program think they're at risk for those? The answer is typically no. They don't think they're catching anything. They don't think they're getting pregnant. Then, is it severe? If they get gonorrhea or chlamydia or they become pregnant, do they see that as a severe issue in their life? Because if they see it as not severe and not impacting their life greatly, then they're not going to be willing to change behaviors as readily. Perceived benefit is not what you think the benefit is, it's what they think the benefit is. So you may think that not getting pregnant will help them be, they can go to college and they can get a better job, but if that's not what they see as a benefit, you promoting your program focused on those benefits will more than likely cause failure. So you actually have to get into your population's head and determine what are the benefits in their minds. Then perceived barriers. What does your population think is a barrier? So if your population has to take 3 buses to get to a healthy grocery food store, and they have to take 3 children with them on the bus, and it takes an hour to get there and an hour to get back, the whole transportation issue becomes a barrier for them. They may think that it's important to eat healthy. They may realize they're at risk for disease if they don't eat healthy. They know all the benefits. They know it's severe, but if they feel that they can't do what you're asking them to do, that's a barrier. Closely related that is self-efficacy. They have to believe they can actually do whatever you're asking them to do. If you're asking them to make healthier meals, do they believe they can do it? If you're asking them to exercise 3 days a week, do they believe they can do it? And then cues to the action are your actual program. So what you're going to do next is you're going to be looking at your grants. In the Blackboard page, let me find our Blackboard page, there is something called Model Worksheet 2. When you open it, it will look like this. Before you come to class, I want you to take some time to think about your grant, and I want you to try to fill these in. The first one is on the Precede-Proceed model. I want you to think about your grant and write about some items that you think are predisposing, some that are reinforcing, and some that are enabling in relationship to your grant and the problem as it's presented to you. Then on the other side of that, I want you to look at the health belief model and try to begin to figure out what is your population's perceptions. What do your populations believe? And in this one, you're going to fill out that. When we come to class next week, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to review these models, and you're going to have information in these charts. If you come without this lesson completed, I will ask you to leave class. So as you're finished the lecture, you're going to open up this form. You're going to fill it out as best that you can so that you can discuss it with your grant groups. You submit nothing with this lesson. All you have to do is to complete these assignments. And then there's a reading assignment, and with the reading assignment, you do have to do this assignment and turn it in by 6/2. So I look forward to seeing you in class next week. Good luck on the assignment, and I'll see you next week.